Good morning, everybody. I have to tell you, by the way, I've been doing this for 12 years, and I have never once seen a roll call the way all of you just did just moments ago. That's really incredible. So it's fun to watch, and I think it's great that you do that. My last name is tricky, and it's nice to be in such an international audience because you have more exposure to different types of names. But in America, no one knows how to pronounce my last name. So for anyone who might be curious, it's pronounced Schwerdtfeger. So come on, you guys. Schwerdtfeger. Huh, so easy. I live in California, so I probably should have run for governor over there. But Arnold beat me to it. Okay, so guys, this is an amazing time. I mean, this is an exciting time, and I spend my life trying to keep abreast of these technology trends and all the changes that are happening. And gosh, there's a lot of them. And I do, maybe 40 or 50 events every year, and they're in every different type of industry, and they're all around the world. And it's the thing I like most, actually, about my job, is that I get exposure, not only to all these different industries, but all these different cultures. And as you know, in this room, certainly, different parts of the world operate very differently. And so I get a little taste of that. And I've had an opportunity to get a little taste of this industry as well. And last night, for example, at the welcome reception, it's amazing that the feeling of camaraderie that you have within this group is striking, and I bring it up because it's going to come up later in my presentation when we talk about blockchain in particular, because it's a perfect fit, really. But the bottom line is that when I do events that are corporate events where, let's say, it's a sales meeting, so everyone's already with that one company, then you see that camaraderie, okay? But when you're in a room or at a conference where a whole bunch of different companies are involved, it's very rare to have that kind of camaraderie that all of you have. And that's a huge opportunity because blockchain, by definition, is an ecosystem play. So we'll come back to that. But the bottom line is that I want to talk more broadly about technology in general, because blockchain is not evolving in isolation. It's evolving as part of a large ecosystem of all these different technologies that's all happening simultaneously. And so I think it's important to review that broader context, which I will do for maybe the first half or so, and then we're going to dig into blockchain in particular and what the opportunities are there. I promise I'm not going to bore you this morning with a whole bunch of charts, but I would like to show you one. And what we're talking about here is the cost of storing 1 terabyte of data. So back in the year 2000, the cost of storing 1 terabyte of data was approximately $17,000 US. Does anyone want to hazard a guess on what we're expected to pay in just 2 years for the exact same thing? If you have any ideas, just yell it out. I'm curious. $100? $4. Wow, who said that? Yeah, good for you. Look at that. So the right answer is $3. $3. Very good guess. So, and listen, you've heard this a million times before. You don't need someone like me to tell you this, but I want you to think about it just for a second. This is not a linear progression, guys. This is an exponential change. Things are changing at an accelerating rate. And that's something that's, as human beings, we're hardwired to think in linear terms. So when we're confronted with an exponential environment, you really have to train. I do it myself, right? I'm studying these things every day, and I always have to remind myself, no, what if it was 10 times as powerful as it is today? Or no, what if the cost of doing it was 1/10 of what it is today, or even 1/100th of what it is today, right? We have to train ourselves to think exponentially, but it's precisely this development with the cost, and by the way, it's not just happening in data storage, it's data storage, data bandwidth, and data processing. All three of those are the 3 pillars of technology. All 3 of them, the cost structure is collapsing. Things are getting cheaper and cheaper. That's what's driving the whole thing. Right, that's what's driving the whole thing. And that was the impetus of the Internet of Things, right? Some people refer to it as M to M. There's now estimates that we're going to have north of 50 billion devices connected through the Internet by the year 2020. It's amazing when you think about it, right? And so there's been this explosion of companies that are developing sensors for every possible use case. More and more sensors are available all the time, and we're just scratching the surface because as soon as 5G comes out, there's going to be an explosion of sensors because now it takes roughly 1/10 the power to transmit because the bandwidth is much wider. So we're going to see an explosion of sensors all over the place collecting data because it's inexpensive to do it. So you're going to be doing it, but so are your clients. So there's going to be data coming out all over the place. And this data is going to be aggregated into the enterprise software applications, ERP, CRM. Right? One of the early winners in the big data space, at the beginning, a lot of the use cases were failing. A lot of big companies were investing millions of dollars and not finding much initially, 2011, 2012. But one of the early use cases that was kind of the early winner in the big data space was predictive maintenance. So you could put, for example, sensors on a machine that records, say, vibration and heat, for example. And so you can anticipate with that data when the machine's going to go down before it actually does. That means you can fix the machine on your schedule rather than waiting for it to all of a sudden go down unexpectedly. Right? It's a huge advantage. So we've seen big implications in the manufacturing sector and mining. Guys, they're putting sensors on the drill bits themselves so that while they're drilling in real time underground, they can do geological modeling based on the pressure and so on and the heat of what it is they're drilling through and dynamically change where they're drilling underground to optimize the drill. Unbelievable stuff. So of course that's had implications in oil and gas. Right, one of the most interesting case histories that that's how I spend my life. I'm always chasing case histories and use cases and success stories. One of the most interesting ones in the predictive maintenance space is with the Airbus 380, which is an amazing aircraft. They're going to stop producing it, but an amazing aircraft all the same. And they're running these 4 huge engines. They're Rolls-Royce engines. They're called Rolls-Royce Trent engines. And those engines are outfitted with hundreds of sensors in each one of those engines, right? And they can produce, get this, they can produce about 10 terabytes of data per engine every 30 minutes. I mean, it's unbelievable. And so the inside of the engine has all these sensors measuring everything, including they have cameras in there that can operate at 2,000 degrees Celsius, which means that when they detect an anomaly on the ground, the plane's in the air. When they detect an anomaly, they can turn the camera on and look around inside the engine to see what's going on and try and diagnose the problem while the plane's still in the air. Right? So what does that allow them to do? Right? The Rolls-Royce knows what's wrong. They have a complete record. They have all the data. They know it needs to be fixed. So it allowed the company to sell very high margin service contracts to the airlines. High margin for Rolls-Royce, but it was still cheaper than the airlines could do themselves. Why? Because they have the data. Guys, it's all about data. Everyone's looking for the data. So they could do it cheaper than the airlines. Meanwhile, it was big margins for them, and today those service contracts represent over 50% of the profitability of Rolls-Royce. Guys, this is a fantastic case history, right? We're talking about a product company. They produce products, leveraging data to sell high service and high profit packages to their clients. So always think to yourself in a session like this, always think, how can I do this myself? How can we use this in my company? Right? How is this possible? How can you use data to provide a service to your clients that they don't have today? And you can do it cheaper than they can do it, and it might be more profitable than anything else you're doing, right? Moving is a low-margin business, right? It's competitive, right? So anyway, we've seen big implications in the real estate business, or I'm sorry, retail. One of the most interesting areas to follow is this area of what they call facilities management. Like even just a room like this. This room probably has 100, 200 sensors in it. It's happening more and more. One of the best examples of this is the Hudson Yards facility, which is going up in New York City. This is a fascinating project, by the way. 19 skyscrapers. It's going to be finished by 2021. It's going to be the most censored residential environment in the world when it's complete. But of course, that's not going to last long because there's countless other projects all over the world. I'm sure many of you are familiar with them within your respective countries. Then we're going to have even more. Right, and all this data is being aggregated on what they call the smart grid. One of the best examples of that today is in Singapore. They're doing some really interesting things. And of course, as you all know, we've got some real implications in the moving industry, right? Transport, logistics, and some of the track and trace technologies. Those are the things that you're all working on. and is evidenced by the fact that there's all these startups in this space. I'm sure some of you have heard of Flexport. Fascinating. They just finished a $1 billion round of funding. Right? The future of the industry. Right? We can watch it in real time. So it truly is an exponential environment. And I want to talk about this idea of exponential thinking a little bit more because, it's easy to say that as human beings we're hardwired to think in linear terms, but truly, I'll use myself as an example. I literally do this every day, and I love it. I love what I do. Guys, I am a nerd. I'm a geek. I read technology stuff. I love that stuff. I've been this way since I was like 7 years old. So I truly love it. But you have to train yourself and think to think in exponential terms. So I want to use an example, which you're all familiar with. But I'll tell you the point in just a second. But one of the best examples of exponential progress recently is the Human Genome Project. And for those of you who don't know, the Human Genome Project started in 1990. And so 1990, think about this. 7 years later, they had only completed 1% of the job, right? And so all these pundits came out of the woodwork. They're on the evening news saying, this is crazy. We're going to need 700 more years to finish this. Right? It takes 7 years to do 1%. It's just the basic math. We're going to need another 700 years. But of course, that's not what happened, right? And there's some people who knew. There's some people who knew what to expect. A good example of that is Ray Kurzweil. I'm sure some of you might be familiar with Ray Kurzweil. Really fascinating guy. Works for Google today. And he said, listen to this, if we're at 1%, we're almost done. How is that possible? He said, if we're at 1%, we're halfway there. Because if you're scaling at 100% per year, in other words, it's doubling every year, how many years does it take to get from 1% to 100? It's only 6.5 years. Right? It seems crazy, but for 1 to 2, that's the first year. 4, 8, 16, 32, that's the fifth year. 64, that's the sixth year. Seventh year, you're over the top. 6.5 years to get from 1 to 100. It seems like it's not possible. That's my point. It's counterintuitive. It doesn't seem logical, right? And that's exactly what happened. In fact, if you do that same math, they actually finished this ahead of schedule, which means it was scaling it slightly more than 100% per year. It's incredible, right? And so we're seeing this play out in technology and the way technology is being adopted. So this graph shows a whole bunch of different technologies and their adoption curve, how fast it took to get from the beginning to 80%. That's kind of the gauge of true adoption is 80%. And you can see that they just get steeper and steeper and steeper, right? Because technology is evolving along an exponential curve, the propagation of these technologies is fast, guys. It's happening so quickly, right? There's a study that came out just recently from Washington University. They suggested that 40% of S&P 500 companies will no longer exist by 2026. Is that possible? Really crazy. And I'll tell you what, I do this for a living. I earn 95% of my income is speaking fees. And so I'm always in front of executives of different industries, and executives are terrified for the most part. They're really scared. They're like, what is going to happen here? But it's the wrong approach, because if you think about it, right, here's what they're worried about, right? They're worried about who's going to come eat my lunch, right? Because there's disruption happening all over the place. But here's the thing. If 40% of S&P 500 companies are gone in the next 10 years, who's going to take their place? Who's going to take their place? I mean, and this is what we have to, as business leaders, we have to think this way, right? We have to think to ourselves, who else's lunch can we eat, right? And it's true, because if they're going to fail, it's not like the economy is going to disappear. The economy is not going to disappear. So if some of these big heavyweights get displaced, someone's going to take their place, right? There is enormous opportunity for companies, particularly in the SME, the small to the medium-sized enterprise. I would think probably most of the people in this room. There's enormous opportunity for small, agile companies to displace big heavyweights that are going to lose their advantage. Right? And that's really the essence of my presentation, is to stay on offense. Right? This is a time to stay on offense. So what I invite you to do for the rest of this session, it's a short session. I only have an hour, probably 45 minutes left at this point. So just take a step back. I know you all have companies and deadlines and milestones and projects, and probably there's all sorts of headaches and logistical problems that you're trying to figure out. But just for the rest of this session, just take a step back. Let me tell you about some of the work that I do. And again, we're going to cover blockchain in some detail in just a second, but there's a broader context that I'd like to share with you as well. And I'm going to start with just a quick story. How many of you recognize these two guys, just out of curiosity? Okay, so actually just one or two. Okay, so we'll start with the guy on the left. His name is Brian Acton, and in 2009, Brian Acton was looking for work, and one of the places he applied for a job was Facebook, and Facebook turned him down. And if you follow him, I've been following Brian for a long time. And he's actually a really gracious, he's a nice guy. So anyway, he wrote a tweet about it at the time, and it went like this. It said, Facebook was turned me down. It was a great opportunity to meet some fantastic people. Looking forward to life's next adventure. And what might that be? Well, he got together with a friend of his and started WhatsApp, which they grew over the course of 5 years and sold to none other than Facebook for a cool $19 billion. So I'm bitter. I'm 48 years old. He's a lot younger than I am. Anyway, so again, of course, the pundits come out in full force when this was a record-breaking transaction, so they were all on the evening news. It turns out there's a few different ways you can look at a transaction like this. One way is that at the time of the sale, WhatsApp had a total of 55 employees. So by that measure, Facebook paid $345 million per employee. That's amazing. Another way to look at it is at the time of the sale, they had an average of 450 million active monthly users. So by that measure, they paid $42 per user. But either way, it's a lot of money. Maybe the most interesting way to look at a transaction like this is that, or again, it's 5 years. Like if you, that amazing, see, honestly, it's 2019, like 5 years ago is 2014. That seems like yesterday to me. Like that was recently, it wasn't long ago. And over the course of just 5 years, their 55 employees managed to engage over 450 million active monthly users. In 5 years, how many people are in this room? Right, 200-300 at this point? Like a very small group of people build something that touched the lives of 500 million people in 5 years. And that speaks to the leverage that's in this system. And this is, whenever you hear a speaker, he or she is always hoping that you're going to walk away with a few key messages. And spoiler alert, this one's one of mine, okay? Because there's more and more leverage in the system all the time, every year that goes by. And a lot of it's financial and this and that. But the big one that's in the room is technology. Right? Technology is a form of leverage. And by the way, when we hear these stories of the division between rich and poor, number one, those stories are true. It's widening, right, rapidly at this point. But it's driven in large part, not exclusively, but in large part by this. Because there's some people and some companies that are leveraging technology, and for the most part, they're doing really well. And at the same time, there's a ton of people and a ton of companies that are being leveraged by the technology. Right? So you're either leveraging the technology or the technology is leveraging you. And for the people in that second category, it's harder and harder every year to get the same results you had the last year because you're swimming upstream. Right? As business leaders, we have to run towards these changes. We have to run towards the technology. You can't shy away from it. And I know sometimes it's intimidating, right? Because you can lose money, right? Maybe it doesn't work. You initiate something, it ends up being a bad decision. But we have to run towards those changes. And there's a million examples, right? Simple things. Software is a form of leverage. You can leverage software, right? The cloud is a form of leverage. You can leverage the cloud, right? You can leverage mobile technology. Increasingly, you can leverage wearable technology. Really cool stuff that's coming out right now. And of course, virtual reality is right around the corner, Right? In fact, Microsoft just got a huge order with the US military so that the propagation curve is just starting to accelerate. Right? We're starting to finally get headsets that actually have the potential to be used in real life. And there's tons of, people think it's all going to be video games, but there's training applications, there's marketing applications. This is being used for virtual conferences. That's going to be impacting the moving and logistics industry to some extent. And then, of course, we've also got 3D printing, which I'm sure many of you are probably playing with at this stage. And there's all sorts of companies that are starting to specialize in 3D printing on demand. Like some of these are huge printers. There's a 3D printer in space, right, where they're 3D printing on the ISS, the International Space Station. Unbelievable. And at the same time, you've got robotics coming on board, and we're seeing robots showing up in hotels. We're seeing robots showing up in shopping malls. Right? We're seeing robots showing up in airports and warehouses. Right? All over the place. New applications. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the new autonomous forklifts within warehouses, and of course we've got all the delivery options that are starting to happen as well. So these are technologies that are all happening at the same time, right? They're all examples of that leverage, right? These are things that you can leverage in your business. Always think, how can we do it? How can we do that? Can we employ this? Can we leverage this? Can we somehow be in front of that trend? So what I want to do today in particular is dive into two topics that I think deserves a little more of a deeper dive, a closer analysis, if you will. And the first one is artificial intelligence and machine learning. And then the second one is going to be the blockchain, and I'll go into that in some detail because, again, they're all happening at the same time, and they overlap with each other. In fact, one of the biggest models in terms of anticipating disruption is when two technologies start to overlap. They come together, and that creates new opportunities. And so blockchain's a big part of that. But let's start just briefly with a look at machine learning and artificial intelligence. And people always say, what constitutes artificial intelligence? Because a lot of what we're talking about is really just data. It's just good analytics. It's good algorithms, right? So what constitutes artificial intelligence? Well, there's really two things that you want to look for. And the first is that it should have some sort of human-level comprehension. But the second one, which is the more important of the two, is you want it to have the ability to learn. Right? The platform should have an ability to learn. So what was the early winner in artificial intelligence? Remember, in big data, the early winner was predictive maintenance. Right? There's always an early winner. There's an early winner for blockchain, too. We'll get to that in a second. But the early winner for artificial intelligence were all the recommendation engines. Right? You go to Amazon and all these different retail stores, and they tell you what else maybe you might be interested in, or if you're watching Netflix, that's being driven to a large extent by artificial intelligence, or if you're listening to Pandora, that's being driven. They're learning, right? They're learning what you like. That's the whole idea. But this is old news. I mean, this has been going on for 8 or 9 years at this point. It's almost mature. But what are some of the things that are happening right now in artificial intelligence? Well, one of the big ones is what they call natural language processing. It's the social bot technology. So chatbot is when you can type with a computer. Social bot is when you can speak to a computer. So obviously the obvious use cases that we're all familiar with is Siri, on your phone, and Google has the same thing. And of course, now we have Amazon Alexa, and Google actually has gotten into the home market as well with their Google Home. Just out of curiosity, and don't put your hand up for me, but for the other people in the room, because you can all look around and see, how many of you have either Amazon Alexa or Google Home in your homes right now? Put your hands up. Take a look around, guys. It's pretty amazing. I mean, I'm guessing it might be 20-25% of the room. And it's really interesting, by the way, because I go to different conferences, and there's the ratio changes, but guys, it's coming very quickly. So where is it going to have an impact? Well, one of the biggest impacts, people don't see it coming, is in the call centers, right? Because imagine these call centers, they have like thousands of employees at some point that are all, and imagine the HR nightmare to try and hire these people and train them, and the logistics and getting people to deliver consistent protocol. And so I imagine how much easier it would be to have a computer do it. And a lot of people think that's never going to happen because, you call your bank and it says, oh, you can say things like, what's my balance, or make a transfer. And it's clumsy and it's irritating, and most of us are like 000 just to get away from it. But guys, the technology is turning the corner right now. Like, it's so interesting. If you have Alexa in your home, you can say, Alexa, let's chat. And it'll go into the social bot and you can test it. And it's getting better right now. They're getting data. That's what they all want. They want data. It's going to affect the call centers, right? And then, so that's natural language processing. That's going to come relatively, 2-3 years. This is going to start to be, because it's getting a lot better right now. But another big one is the whole area of object and image recognition, right? And that's being used in a whole bunch of different places, including, believe it or not, in advanced manufacturing, looking for defects in production processes, for example. Believe it or not, it's being used as well just to count people in large demonstrations and so on. But one of the big ones, and this is going to affect your industry, it plays a key role, a pivotal role in autonomous driving. So what's going to happen there? Well, we can look back at the history just really briefly. Tesla introduced their Autopilot back in 2015, and then the year after that was when the Ollie bus started operating in London, running on IBM Watson. Right? What are they looking for? They're looking for data, right? Everyone's looking for data. Why did Facebook pay $19 billion for WhatsApp? They wanted the data. Right? That's what everyone's after. Think about what data you have. What data could you get? Right? That's a big part of this whole thing. Even when it comes to blockchain, you have to know what data you have before you can even start having that conversation. Anyway, so the Nutonomy car was launched just a couple months later in Singapore. This is an autonomous taxi service, again, in a particular neighborhood it's operating. And then Uber has pilots happening now in 3 or 4 different cities. The Google car is going to be open to the public by the end of this year, supposedly. And there's all these concepts coming out, really interesting ideas. This one here looks like it came straight out of Blade Runner. It's really cool. It's so awesome. They've raised a ton of money. And you know, it's configured exactly the same way if it's driving forward or backward, because if it's autonomously driven, it doesn't matter if it's going forward or backward. So the people inside actually face each other. But anyway, it's also affecting the trucking companies, right? And now we're getting a little bit closer to home. So this is the case study that was run by Uber. The company is called Otto, but Otto was purchased by Uber. So they ran this last summer, where they had this truck drive 125 miles down the freeway to Colorado Springs. There was a guy in the cab, but he wasn't driving. Payload was 50,000 cans of Budweiser. It arrived on time, right? And we all know that Uber is getting into the freight business, right? So that's what they're doing. So there's going to be alternative models, right? In the introduction, they talked about disruption that starts at the bottom of the industry and relentlessly kind of bubbles up and potentially displaces certain things in the future. So we have to ask ourselves, how can we participate? How can we be on the right side of that leverage equation? Right? There's Uber Freight is on its way. Those things are coming. And here in Europe, they had a pilot program that was run at a similar time last summer, where these 3 trucks were sent across all of continental Europe. 8 countries they crossed with these 3 trucks platooning the whole way. And there's, again, all the car companies are coming up with autonomous trucks. This is the Mercedes version, and if you don't, Volvo's is really cool. So if you don't need a driver, then you don't need a cab either. So this is the Volvo version, because you don't have to make space for a human, right? Really interesting. So really all we're waiting for is regulations, and that's coming soon. In fact, I would bet that in America at least, probably by the end of this year, 2019, at least some state in the union, and I can't tell you which, and I don't even know if it'll happen, but it's my guess that it will. By the end of this year, some state will legalize hub-to-hub freeway driving. Because, okay, so in the highest number of obstacles is where? It's in the city, right? That's where the highest number of obstacles are. Where is there fewer obstacles? On the freeway. Right? And so that regulation is going to come first. Now, where is there less obstacles than the freeway? In agriculture. This is happening already today. Right? And this thing, look at this. This thing's badass. Look at this. I'd love to have one of these myself. Look at the wheels. Thing's incredible. You go to the combines in Iowa, those combines are all satellite driven. You can map your your territory down to the square inch and have this thing come to life at 2 o'clock in the morning when it's a little bit cooler outside, there's less stress on the plants, run the whole job while you're sleeping. And they're doing it today. So you can see the progression. You can model the future. Guys, we can see the future if you just model it correctly, right? Where's the least number of obstacles? Agriculture and also in mining, right? That's happening today. It's already there. So we can see the propagation curve. Now, I want to do one more thing with autonomous driving, and then we'll move on to the blockchain topic. But how do they learn? And this is really interesting. You want to understand what's happening. This is probably the best example I have today. So remember I said Tesla introduced Autopilot in 2015? And by the way, the cars already had the hardware installed. So when they announced it, there was over 100,000 cars already on the road that had the capability. So there was one guy, and I lived in the Bay Area for 18 years until just recently. In the Bay Area, he lived in the Santa Cruz Hills, and he lived in Santa Cruz Hills, and there, on the way to his house, there was a very tight hairpin corner. This isn't the corner. I just bought this image, but apparently there's a tight corner on the way to his house. Anyway, so that first day, they made the announcement, and he was driving home, and he was approaching that corner in his car, and he took his hands off the wheel and was like, all right, let's see what you got, which I'm not sure I would have done that. But anyway, and the car it made the corner. It didn't veer off the road or anything, but the brakes came on, and the warning light came on saying take control of the car. So it was basically a fail. The next day, he did it again. And then he did it again and again and again. 2 weeks later, the car knew how to take the corner. But it wasn't just his car that knew how to take that corner. It was every Tesla knew how to take that. God, this is so key, okay? This is what they call fleet learning. This is why it's so powerful. Because if you can set it up where everyone's on a network and you can take the individual use cases of individual people on that network and upload them to the cloud where the true intelligence resides, then everybody benefits from things that you never did. Someone else on the network experienced something, and it went up into the cloud, they fixed the problem, and now your system. That's why it's so powerful. That's why everyone's looking for the data and trying to accelerate, right? That's what makes the whole process exponential, is this network effect. If you go to Silicon Valley, all the venture capital people, they're all talking about fleet learning, right? Scalability. How do we get people so we can accelerate that curve? Right, really, really fascinating stuff. So it's coming really quick. And amidst all of that, all of this technology that we're seeing all around us, we have blockchain showing up in the middle of all this. Right, so how does that work? Right, and I know in a room like this, there's probably some people who know a ton about blockchain and some people where maybe you don't know much at all. So I have to kind of address the whole thing. But let me just, obviously, blockchain is the technology behind Bitcoin, okay? But let's just talk about the architecture of blockchain in particular. And it's easier than you think, right? People make it more complicated than it needs to be. So just think about even like an Excel spreadsheet. Think about an Excel spreadsheet. But instead of having, and it's listing transactions, okay? But instead of having that Excel spreadsheet in one place, on one server, your computer, okay, that Excel spreadsheet is actually on hundreds or thousands of different computers simultaneously, and all those computers have to agree through a consensus mechanism that they all have the latest, most up-to-date, accurate version. Okay? By doing that, it makes it almost impossible to hack, because you can't hack one, they call them nodes. Every server is called a node. Okay, so your computer, in this case, would be one node. So you can't hack just one node and get away with it, because all the others would immediately see that this one's been tampered with, right? So you would have to hack 51% of all the nodes at the exact same time, in the exact same way, with every single one of them being successful in order for the hack to work. Now, and it gets even better than that. And here's the essence of blockchain right here. Because every time a new block of transactions is added to the chain of previous blocks, right, hence the term blockchain, the newest block has a summary of the previous block embedded in this block. It's called a hash. Okay? Which means that once something is on the blockchain, you can never change it because you would have to hack every subsequent block in 51% of the nodes simultaneously successfully for it to work. And so, like Bitcoin, as an example, nobody has ever successfully hacked the Bitcoin blockchain. They've hacked exchanges that interact with the Bitcoin blockchain. They've hacked wallets which interact with the Bitcoin blockchain, but no one has ever successfully hacked the Bitcoin blockchain. And believe me, everybody has tried. Everybody. It's a ton of money. Right? Everyone's tried, and no one's done it successfully. So there's a pretty strong use case here for blockchain as being, essentially, it's a distributed ledger, but more importantly, you can sum up blockchain in 3 words, and that is that blockchain automates trust. It's just a software architecture. It's just a process of recording transactions. But the way they do it, it guarantees trust, which means you can do business with somebody that you don't trust and use a blockchain in the middle, and you don't have to worry. You don't need someone in there to keep track of it. You can see exactly what's going on. So there was a use case that took place last year that involved 88 bales of cotton, because the early winner in blockchain is supply chain management. Supply chain management is where all the talk is, and there's really 2 areas, supply chain management and digital identity. Those are in the lead. So in this case, 88 bales of cotton were produced in Texas and shipped all the way to China, and all the details of the transaction were uploaded to a private Ethereum blockchain using what's called a smart contract. And a smart contract is just a contract that has if-then statements built into it. So if this happens, then do that, or if otherwise do this, and then if that happens, it's a decision tree with all the permutations, all the possible things that can happen written in a software code, and it's uploaded to a blockchain. And everybody has to agree through that consensus mechanism that, yeah, this is what we agreed to. And once it's up, the thing runs itself. Right? And so when the shipment finally arrives in China and someone scans the barcode, that automatically transfers ownership and releases payment for the goods because it's just written into the code, which means there isn't a company that has to manage all that stuff. Right? So if you want to understand smart contracts, just imagine wills and contracts that execute themselves. Okay, and there's all sorts of use cases, but another big one involved 60,000 tons of soybeans. So there's huge implications for the supply chain, because imagine that transaction. Right? You've got the producer of cotton, right? You've got a trucker that goes to the port, you've got a loader to get it on the ship, you have customs clearance at that point, then you're on the ship, and there's 5 or 6 companies involved in that process, right? And then, is it not going? Oh, no kidding. Can you guys hear me better? Sorry about that, guys. I couldn't tell from up here. Anyway, so there's all kinds of companies that are involved in these transactions, right? So if you have everyone on a blockchain, then all those individual participants are maintaining their own nodes on that blockchain. So they all collaborate. When you upload a new order, everyone looks at it and says, yeah, that's what we agreed to. Right? And so at that point, everyone's connected through a blockchain. And if you pay for the goods using a cryptocurrency, you can eliminate the banks altogether. Right? And all these companies have order entry people and project management and order tracking and audit and compliance. Those are all salaries. Right? Your companies have them, and all the companies you deal with, they all have administrative salaries that are doing all these jobs that could be effectively automated using a blockchain. So there's efficiencies, right? That's why people want to do this. There's efficiencies at play. Not only can you do business with people you don't necessarily trust, but you can do it in a more efficient way than what's happening today. So you can apply this to any industry. Like if you're in the automobile industry, you can have all the different participants that are involved in that process be connected through a blockchain. If you're in the real estate business, all the different participants can be connected through that blockchain as well, right? And of course, in your industry, right? And this is the interesting thing about blockchain is by definition, it's an ecosystem play, right? You're involving other people, potentially your competitors, potentially your customers or suppliers are all on the same they're all in the same blockchain, right? By the way, that's one of the reasons why blockchain has been a little bit slow to propagate, because people don't want to, there's a resistance to doing that. They don't want to do that. But in this industry, with all your companies all over the world, and you know each other and you trust each other, and you come together in a way where it almost seems like you're all part of one big family, this is a perfect place to use blockchain. I know that I just had a conversation yesterday with some of the people from FIDI and some others who are really trying to use this as an opportunity to create a competitive advantage. Right? I just heard that the U.S. military has got a RFP. They're out for quotation to find a single provider to do all of their moving and transport relocation jobs to one provider. Well, what can we do as an industry to compete against something like that? So we have something on our side to say, yeah, look, we've got something that is as good and even better with the traceability and being able to track shipments around the world in an open and transparent way. That's precisely what blockchain can do. Right? It's unusual, actually, frankly, to see an industry that's so well suited for it. So there's a bunch of startups in the blockchain space, of course. This is a company that was originally trying to reduce risk and fraud by tracking diamonds from the mine all the way to retail shelves to eliminate, blood diamonds and all that sort of thing. But then they realized how powerful the traceability factor was, right, and the transparency of being able to follow things through the supply chain. And so they started offering that as the primary service proposition. And now they're doing the same thing for pharmaceutical medications, and they're doing the same thing to track GMO foods around the world to make sure that people know where the food they're purchasing has come from. There was recently a collaboration between Accenture and Microsoft, which was trying to give digital identity to refugees, primarily Syrian refugees, so that people could prove who they were with nothing more than a cell phone, biometric database. Right? And it can be used to track land ownership and title. It can be used to track certifications in the education process. But imagine what the use cases are in the track and trace space. Right? It's an enormous, where is my stuff? Where is my stuff? I'm sure you guys get that call thousands of times. Right? What if there was a way to have the blockchain set up where people can just be, it's right there. You can see where the barcodes were scanned. It's all right there. People are uploading that data, and it's happening in an automatic way, right? Trying to track all these immense shipments that are going all over the world, right? It must be an enormous job. I can only imagine. But blockchain has a real value proposition for people in your space. So it was mentioned earlier on that Maersk has done a use case with blockchain where they involved 90-some companies, more than 30 ports, which allowed them to expedite the customs clearance process. And the British Airways has used blockchain to keep track of all the flights and changes in flight times and data and which planes were being used. Involved 3 different airports, including London Heathrow and the one here in Amsterdam, 2 of the largest airports in the world, actually. And then probably the most relevant use case is UPS, because it turns out UPS uses a lot of subcontractors to move their stuff around the world, and they subcontract to different companies, even though it's all private labeled to the customer's eyes, but on the back end, it's involving a whole bunch of subcontractors. Well, that sounds a lot like what you guys do every single day. And so they are using blockchain to try and track some of those shipments around the world and do it in a more efficient way. FedEx was doing the same thing with some of their high-value products. So there's a lot of companies looking at using blockchain as a way to accelerate and make things more efficient in their operations. Walmart in the United States and 9 other suppliers did a blockchain use case. So these deployments are starting to come. This is the De Beers company. This is a Canadian company that dominates the diamond business. They've got a blockchain which actually was started from that Block Verify, the company I just showed you in a second ago. So there's a real opportunity, I believe, in this industry in particular to use blockchain. It's something that I think, speak with your competitors, speak with your friends, speak with the other people in the industry on other parts of the world. It doesn't cost a lot, right? Really, setting up the blockchain is the easy part. The hard part, by the way, is interoperability. That's the big question, right? Everyone's running different systems. If you can kind of get that standardized so that different companies are using the same basic systems, whatever those systems may be, setting up the blockchain can be very, very easy to do. And I think it's something that would work very well in this industry. But again, blockchain is one technology in a whole suite of different technologies that are all evolving at the same time. And I would say these are the big ones that are really affecting not just this industry, but all industries right now are being affected by these technologies that are all evolving very quickly. So what I'd like to finish with, and we're like 8 minutes 10 minutes from being done, but I want to finish by speaking about disruptive innovation in general, because it's something that's quite often misunderstood, okay? Because there's two types of innovation, right? There's incremental innovation, which comes from the center of expertise, right? It comes from the scientists and the specialists and the people who are calibrating inside your company and making things a little bit better every single year. And that's a very powerful thing that has incredible opportunity to transform the world, and it has for many decades already. But that's not what disruptive innovation is, right? Disruptive innovation, it comes from the sides. Disruptive innovation invalidates existing business markets. It's the kind of thing that it comes from the side, you don't even see it coming, and all of a sudden the entire industry is torn apart, right? And that stuff's happening too. So that's what I want to talk about quickly. And there's obvious examples like Apple disrupted the music business, right? They disrupted the phone business, right? No one saw that coming at the time. Today it's, foregone conclusion. Google disrupted the phone business as well. So disruptive innovation tends to come from what I refer to as adjacent markets, right? Adjacent markets. When things, like what's an adjacent market? So you think to yourself, if there's different industries that are separate, but they overlap in certain places, the disruptive innovation tends to come from those overlaps. So what's an adjacent market? Well, think, what's your biggest supplier? Who else do they sell to? That's an adjacent market. Think about your biggest customer. Who else do they buy from? That's an adjacent market. In 20 minutes, you can sit down and write a list of 20 or 30 adjacent markets. And you can go through that list and see, basically, you're asking yourself, what do they do poorly? Right? What's not working? Can I bring that in-house? Can I do that myself? Right? That's what you're asking. That's the question. So again, these examples are everywhere, right? Like LinkedIn disrupted the recruiting business, and Amazon disrupted the book business with their e-reader Kindle. Right? Now Uber is getting in the food delivery business. It's amazing, right, how much is happening in food delivery, and of course Amazon's getting into the grocery business. Right? These are adjacent markets. Right? Google and Tesla are getting into the car business. No one would have believed that 10 or 15 years ago, and here we are. Right? Technology companies getting into automobiles. Facebook is disrupting the ISP business with these planes. They fly they're solar powered. They fly at 70,000 feet. They can stay up there for months at a time, delivering internet to the people below. It's incredible, right? That'll change the ISP business. And Google's trying to do the same thing with their Project Loon, right? All this stuff is happening. So disruptive innovation tends to come from the sides. So what's a perfect example of that, right? Because, by the way, that's why people get caught off guard. Very smart, very accomplished executives, some of the biggest companies in the world, get caught off. Okay, Kodak, right? Holy smoke. Who developed the digital camera? Kodak. Can you believe it? Kodak developed the digital camera, and they were like, nope, no one's going to want it. And they abandoned the project. And then it developed along an exponential curve and wiped them out. Those are smart people at Kodak. They hire smart people. They just come completely. So, what's the cutting edge? What's the cutting edge of nutritional supplements? Just think about it. What's the cutting edge, the bleeding edge of nutritional supplements? It's in horse racing. That's where they test the supplements. Right? It makes good sense, right? You got $1 million in a horse. He's not quite good enough to win. You'll try anything to see if it'll work. That's where they tested creatine. Who here takes creatine? I take creatine. That started in horse racing. That's where they tested D3 and the impact of zinc loading on testosterone. All that stuff started in horse racing. It's less regulated. Right? You can test stuff and get away with it, and the stuff that works, it propagates, comes in from the side, comes from an adjacent market. Right? What's the cutting edge of online marketing? Here in Amsterdam, can you believe it? It's in porn. Right? It's in gambling, online gambling. That's where they test the latest wireframes and lead magnets and conversion funnels. That all happens on the fringe, at the crazy, the stuff that nobody wants to look at. That's where it starts. And then they test it there, and what works starts to creep in. Right? You look at all the internet marketing stuff today, at the beginning, it was used in these fringe categories. Right? So disruptive innovation tends to come from the side. And I'll give you one more, and then I've got a few slides at the end just to close it out. But disruptive innovation tends to cater to the least profitable market segment first. Right? So think about these are the customers you hate the most. Oh, they're such a pain in the neck. They have no money. They call 20 times a day, right? Those are the customers nobody wants, right? Guess what? That's where disrupted, because, okay, what do we all do? Right? And the beauty of this model is that it applies to every single industry. What do we all do? We all focus on the most profitable market segment, which is at the top. And you sell these premium products and extra services. I talked about it at the beginning. What services can you sell at a premium? Using the data, leveraging the data, and so on. Everyone's doing that. And so we have this pervasive upward push in every single industry selling new services at the top. And who gets left behind? It's the people at the bottom. Disruptive innovation tends to cater to the least profitable market segment first. So it's a good exercise to identify those. What do they want? They want a cheaper, less expensive solution. They want a simpler, less expensive solution. 9 times out of 10, that's what they want, right? And so so you can kind of look at once a month. Once a month, you can have a meeting on a Friday afternoon and run some of these questions and have a little exercise. So I do these strategy sessions. I do that a lot. And I always tell people to look up, look down, look side to side. Right? Look up. That's where the profit is. We talked about that. Selling premium products. Don't abandon that. That's good money. That's good profit up there. But take some time to look down and see what the least profitable market segment is doing. That's where the disruptive innovation comes from. And look side to side. Those are those adjacent markets. Right? Who else's lunch can I eat? Right? That's where you look at that all the time. Find out, are there new revenue opportunities that are on the side there? So when you think about your industry, right, can you use data? Can you find a way to leverage data to understand your customer better or to facilitate a more accurate track and trace model for your customers? How can you prepare for 5G mobile technology? It's coming. And when it comes, it's going to add new changes to the industry. How can we prepare for it? And how can we take advantage of blockchain? That one's coming too, right? Supply chain management. I think the sooner the better. Get together. Get projects going. Coordinate with FIDI because they're trying to do this. So if you're interested in that, speak to them because they're looking for people to start a test. Right? That's something that we can do right away. The message that I have for you today is just to think much bigger. Think way bigger about what's possible. Right? Because when you do that, there's a couple things you can take for granted. The first is that you end up inspiring everyone around you. Right? People get excited when you're trying something new. And the second thing, when you're trying something new, right, a lot of times you end up having almost no competition along the way because no one else has the courage to do something like that. Right? So we have there's people, poster children of people who think this way, and I love quotes. I literally buy books of quotes, and Richard Branson, of course, has a ton of them. This is my favorite Richard Branson quote. The fastest way to become a millionaire is to start out as a billionaire and then start an airline. Brilliant. So, I mean, he started Virgin Galactic, right? Like, how much bigger are you going to get than that? And then you have people like Elon Musk. I mean, this guy is unbelievable, the stuff he's doing. This launch, I don't know if any of you saw this. If you haven't, you should get on Google and watch it. It's unbelievable because they're reusing the hardware. They're bringing the rockets back down and landing them like pencils on the same platform that they took off from 11 or 12 minutes earlier, taking the cost way, way, way down. Total disruptive innovation. The first time they did it was right at the end of 2015, right before Christmas time. And when they did, their employees partied like it was 1999. They're 27 years old on average. Guys, that makes them millennials. Millennials get a bad rap, don't they? They're lazy, entitled, apathetic. It's not true. It's not true. Those people, those millennials will work harder than anyone you've ever hired if you give them something inspiring to work towards. Because it is really true. You think big. They want to do something cool, right? They want to be part of something bigger, right? They want to change the world. So all these stories that we hear of people who think this way, they're really all the same, right? At the end of the day, my presentation isn't really about technology or blockchain per se. It's about leadership, right? It's about who's willing to say, yes, we'll try it. We'll try to do this. We're going to invest a little bit of money. We're going to allocate some money, and we're going to try a new solution and try and change our business model. We're going to stay on the right side of the leverage equation, right? It's all just about thinking way, way bigger. So I really appreciate you guys coming back for this session after the roll call. Pretty incredible that you guys do that. I loved it, and I appreciate your time very much this morning. Thank you. We'll see you again in 2 days.